Greetings everyone, my name is DJ and I'm the creator of the reality synthesis model of manifesting. Today I want to go into some more details about what that actually is and how we can practically use it. So here's the deal. Reality synthesis fundamentally is a completely new model of manifesting, a completely new model of reality as a whole that has never been shown anywhere on the face of the earth as far as I know. This is a model that I spent about 8 years trying to develop. I never knew I would end up here when I started, but here I am. And the basis of this in reality synthesis is about components coming together to form new components. Okay, it's alchemy. It's based on the principles of alchemy, basically. All things are alchemical processes. It is components coming together, getting synthesized together to form new components, which then interact once again. So there's a model of physics that's been long lost to time called, well, it's never really had an official name, but it used the absolute reference frame of the ether, be it a mechanical ether or a chemical ether. Right? The Maxwellian ether, for example, that was the standard model for quite some time in the mid 1800s to around the early 1900s, by the time Einstein came into play. And since Einstein's theories was never actually demonstrated to be correct, and the Michelson-Morley experiment was never refuted, we've really yet to actually find a valid model scientifically that explains how and why manifesting actually works. The quantum model is absolute nonsense. Most people don't understand that nothing has probability functions, and the whole observer effect can be explained with longitudinal interferometry. There are valid sciences which refute quantum physics. They've been out there for a very, very long time. In fact, superluminal propagation has been known since 1834 with Charles Wheatstone's experiments. He found superluminal propagation of light to be a factor of pi over 2 times c, or 1.57 times c. So this stuff has been known for a long time. I just want you guys to understand that. The standard model of quantum mechanics that supposedly explains manifesting is complete nonsense. That's the basis of really where I want to preface this. The real science behind manifesting has got nothing to do with what anybody else out there is telling you, at all. not even a fraction of a percentage, right? So we're gonna go into some real metaphysics. We're gonna go into some real alchemy. We're gonna go into some real tangible mathematics here. We're gonna explain how this all works, and we're gonna give you some practical examples as to what's going on. So to start, reality synthesis is the idea that multiple components come together to form something new. So we'll just start by a circle. We're going to draw this all up here because I'm doing it jank style. That's just how I do things. So fundamentally, we have this idea of the subconscious mind, right? We always hear about the subconscious mind needing to be so-called reprogrammed. Well, you don't have a subconscious mind. Surprise, you actually don't have a subconscious mind. You have an unconscious mind, and you have a conscious mind. You have a lunar and a solar aspect, a yin and a yang aspect, a charge and a discharge aspect, a polarity. Okay, this dualism is the basis of how interferometry works. Now, interferometry is about waves mixing. So you can imagine a sine wave, right? And we've got a sine wave that's of equal phase. Now, when these two waves interfere with each other, right? So this is reference going straight along. It's not straight, but you get the idea. These 2 points are in phase together. And so when these waves interact, they peak and they form a higher and a lower trough, right? So they amplify and they attenuate. This is really the basis of how reality works, okay? It is ideas, concepts, and contexts coming together to form ideas that we experience as reality. So you have an unconscious mind. This is the unconscious mind. Unconscious mind. And within that, you have a small aspect called the conscious mind. The conscious mind harnesses what is held within the unconscious mind. So the unconscious mind is the storage mechanism which contains all possibilities and all potentials that you can possibly experience, right? Within the reactive potential that is existing within your field geometries, and we'll get into what that is in a sec. So when you're changing states, a state is essentially the interaction of the conscious mind and the unconscious mind formulating the subconscious mind. So when an area of the conscious mind is lighting up and interfering with, just like these waves, right? Just like when these waves interfere, you can imagine the unconscious mind as its own wave. When these waves interact, they peak, right? That peak is a new set of experience that you will have by shifting the conscious mind within the unconscious mind, and thus creating a new state of being that you embody and that you walk through life with, and thus your experiences change as well. So when you shift states, your conscious mind will shift into a new part in the unconscious mind, and thus a new pathway will be generated. So if you've seen my model I call the House of Cards model, which explains what this idea actually is and how your mind is structured, just like a house of cards. That's not really the way that I wanted to do. I can't remember how to do it, but basically the mind is formulated of 3 levels. You have now all of these are their own levels, right? So you have 3 levels. So this is the conceptual sense, contextual sense, and then the concept of the desire. So when we work top down, when you're continually trying to affirm for something and you're trying to repeat it over and over and over again, even using a visualization, you're using your imagination to try and penetrate the top layer, right? And you're thinking that doing this is going to affect what's down below. Now, I want you to tell me something here. If you were trying to topple down a house of cards, you wouldn't try and take the top layer off first. You wouldn't try and take the top layer off and expect the bottom layer to fall out. No, you would attack the bottom. You would attack the very contextual sense that you have. So when you shift the contextual sense, as in how you view yourself and how the world views you, this is different from a concept. We will get to that soon. The context is the sense. It's not an idea. It's a vibe. It's what Neville Goddard calls the feeling, right? This is basically your state, this in and of itself. And remember how I was talking about parts interacting. When these 2 parts interact, they form this. So when we shift this, everything above moves with it. So if you shifted this part down here, the contextual sense, by assuming yourself to be different, and remember you can use assumptions to shift what's above just as easily as what's below, right? Because it's all integrated. It's fractally proportionally integrated. Right, there is one pattern that plays out. There is one pattern, and you could argue that this one pattern is a Pythagorean triangle with 108, 36 degree bond angles between the dipole of hydrogen and oxygen. So you've got your 2 hydrogens and your oxygen. This is not exactly the right dimensions to draw from a Pythagorean triangle, but you can actually make a commensurate cut, roughly around. I really can't do this right, but you can make a commensurate cut, right? And this right here is another Pythagorean triangle within the Pythagorean triangle. And then we can do it again, roughly at this angle, and then we have another one, 36 degrees, and then we can cut it again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again, infinitely, right? This geometry right here is what reality is. Reality is geometry. Geometry is the language of reality. So when we're manifesting, what we're actually doing is we're actually unfolding, we're unpacking these packed in field geometries here. And we're, by shifting the contextual sense, we're reverse engineering what is embedded and what is integrated unconsciously by drawing it out consciously and reforming it into a new structure and forming a new pathway by which we experience reality. That is the mechanics of it, tangibly. That is literally the mechanics as to how your reality shifts. Do you understand? Reality is made of a substrate of an ether, an all-pervading medium. Okay, the absolute reference frame is everywhere. There is no relative reference frame, there is an absolute reference frame. Einstein was wrong, sorry to say. I could go into that, that's another rabbit hole for another day, but there's no relative reference frame. There is no probabilistic functions. Does this proportional geometry here look random to you? And none whatsoever, right? There is a very, very, very ordered nature to reality. Everything is divinely proportional, and we'll get into this as well, what proportionality is. You have the symbols, phi and pi, right? When you have this, the ratios of pi or phi, 1.618, for example, and you integrate this geometry within a already established series of geometries here, you would have within these geometries more proportional commensurate parts to it, like a fractal, right? You have like the same pattern, right? You know, like the triangle within the it's not exactly like this, but you get the idea, right? It's a repeating pattern. And when we unfold this pattern by changing the very basis of who we are and what we think of ourselves as, we unpack and we reform a new one in a new proportionality, right? We formulate a completely new basis as to how and why anything exists and what we experience. That's the mechanics as to how this works. By shifting the conscious mind, by shifting our conceptual sense, we shift the geometries that play out, and thus we change how our experiences are experienced in our life. That's what it actually is. Now let's go into what anything actually is fundamentally. There is something called a self-recursive precession. Now this is a cycle, right? It's a circle, which you can pretty much just, I can't really draw a perfect circle, but it's an emanationary process. Now an emanation is basically it's the continual producing of phenomena by unfolding of cycles, right? You know how you have a cycle. Everybody talks about frequencies and so-called vibrations, right? Everybody who talks about frequencies and vibrations in the law of assumption has no idea what they're talking about, right? Not one person. There is not one person anywhere in this community but me who understands how this works. Okay? There is absolutely no validity to having a higher frequency, meaning that you are of a better state. Being a higher frequency has nothing to do with being in a better state at all. That has never been demonstrated. What we're talking about here is proportionality, the ratio. See, the ratios between these aspects that generate our experiences are what is more important than how high the number is. How high the number is has got nothing to do with it. It is the ratio. This ratio here is what enables this geometry to be fractal. It's got nothing to do with how high the numbers are. It's about the proportionality between components. As I said, everything is a product of two components interacting to form something new, and thus they create new experiences as a result. It's got nothing to do with individual discrete points being shifted towards. It's about everything, the entire geometries of who and what you are and what you're capable of right here. Everything is integrated. Everything is proportionally integrated. I made a video on this a while ago, and you should read that one or listen to that one and understand it. I'll link to it in the description. But that's a practical example as to how and why you can do that, because your thoughts are integrated. If you think about something that's a bad memory or even a good memory, you'll have a thought that comes up after that. And if you go into that memory, you'll have a thought that comes up after that. And then another thought, and then another thought, and then another thought, right? So they follow pathways. So this is a memory, 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 and then this is a memory, right? And you get to the very core aspect of where this came from. Now, if you shift this down here, everything else up above shifts with it, right? So if you modulate this and move it by changing the conceptual sense of who and what you think you are, everything above it shifts. This whole base layer, it shifts across, and thus everything else over here, all of this negative stuff, it gets left behind, and a new formulation is built on top of it. That's how it works. So let's get back to emanationary process real quick. Seems scattered, but it's difficult to explain all these points in one go. So emanationary process is the continual unfolding, perpetually, eternally. There was no first cause, there is no end, there is no beginning, it's just cycles unfolding. So we have positive charge, negative charge, right? That's all there really is. And we have within these states, reference states. These reference states are essentially like the midpoints, where there is really like the minimum point of potential, where there is no kind of like, there is no perturbance, there is no vibration at these points. It's the lowest point of pressure, you could say. When I say pressure, think of the ether as like an all-pervading medium of air, if you want. You can think of it as water, air, whatever, right? The pressure, water pressure, air pressure, think of it like that. That's what the ether is. That's what the medium is. That's what the one substance is. That's what your mind is. That's what reality is. That's what everything is. Everything is ether. That's why ether exists in the elements of the ancient Taoist texts, for example. The ether is a fundamental component of reality, okay? Everything is built of ether, not really built, but everything is modulations of ether playing off of themselves. As I said, they interact together. So this emanationary process that continually unfolds eternally, right? When we have life and death are just stages on a cycle, right? Life and death are stages on a cycle. They are not discrete things in and of themselves. They are products of an unfolding process playing out. right? Time is this process playing out. That's what time is. Space is this process playing out. Your consciousness is this process playing out. That is what everything is. And within this process, again, we have field geometries that are proportionally representative, which generate the conscious and the unconscious examples of the thoughts that we have. This is how reality works. If you've made it this far and you understand what I just said, you understand everything about how manifesting works right now. You already get it, if you understood what I said. There's more to it than that, but that's really the basis of how this works. I'm going to go into more depth on this in future videos with proper graphics and whatnot, but this takes a lot of time to make this stuff up. I've also got a better camera on the way, so that's going to also help this process out. But this is basically how things work. This is the basis of manifesting. It's got nothing to do with probabilities and shifting from this reality into this reality. How does that work? How does that actually work? I've outlined the geometries, I've outlined the proportionalities, I've outlined the mechanics as to how the minds work, I've outlined the ideas that we have, I've outlined eternity and how first cause fundamentally happens. I've outlined everything. There is no probability functions, there is no relativity. It is an absolute frame of reference according to an ether, an etheric medium, one substance, the prime medium. So everything works. So when we shift our assumptions, when we shift our thoughts, when we shift our sense of self, our contextual sense. Remember, context provides meaning to concepts. This is right, I was going to talk about this. Concepts need context to have meaning, right? So a concept modulates with a context to form a new thought process. So our desires change with our sense of self. So you can see how it's causal. This causes this, causes this. They all cause each other. They result in each other. They are integrated within each other. And this is the foundation from which this is built, to which this is built, to which whatever is above this is built. Do you see? And this pattern plays out again. So within this you have more layers. So you got another couple of layers here. That plays out, and then within this you've got more layers again. You got more layers up here, and then that plays out, and you got another one, another one, another one. That's how it works. That's literally that's how reality works. It's just like this. This is that, but this is the proportionality that can be representative in tangible geometry. This is just my kind of example as to, make it work with manifesting. So when we move our conscious mind, we reveal aspects of the unconscious mind that were previously not being interacted with, and thus we change the modulation of the waves, and we either peak or trough and create either higher amplitudes or lower amplitudes. That is the frequency shift that you have. It's got nothing to do with higher or lower. It's about the proportionality. Again, the proportionality is representative as resistance. Right? When this proportionality is not exactly as to these geometries, then you do not have a fractal pathway to represent. There is no pathway for it to follow because it's broken. It's resistive. There is no commensurate geometry through which this unfolding process can take place, and thus you hit a dead end. It can't keep going. The self-recursive process hits a wall and resistance is formed and you basically get stuck. That's what false identification is. All the ancient texts that I've ever read, the primary topics that they always spoke of was false identification. False identification is suffering. Literally, false identification is suffering. These ancient texts were about manifesting, fundamentally. They really were. And they outlined a lot of examples as to how and why this is, for example, the Bible, but Buddhism is another one. They said to negate consciousness. They said to negate the senses. Do you know what that means? Because when you use your imagination, right, you're working in the conceptual level, not the contextual level. You cannot imagine meaning, can you? You can't imagine what meaning is. You cannot imagine a meaning for a concept without this contextual sense. The contextual sense underlies and supports your imaginary sense. Okay, this is very important to understand. Your imagination is not fundamental. It is not fundamental at all. There is something underlying and preceding it even. And that's what the basis of self-recursion is. It is the context. It is the meaning. The meaning, right? The meaning creates ideas. This is why the world exists the way that it does. Okay, if we tracked this all the way back to the very, very, very beginning, right? And we followed all the layers through, and we went all the way along, and we formed our own series of field geometries, yada, 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 right? We went all the way down to the very, very basis of where this fractal started. Right? Really, it's infinite, but if we get to the very basis, it would have a context. It would be formed of a context. That's how things were first started. And then that context processed out vertically. And this is how this pattern was formed. We had a proportional emanationary process unfolding self-recursively following these stages of polarity, manifesting phenomena through the context forming with the interaction of other contexts emanating out of this potential here, forming together to create concepts, which then, had a chain reaction and followed this progression, forming the phenomena and the world that we have today. That's why anything exists at all. That's why things exist. Your birth conditions can be explained by this as well. It's the continuation of where you were. It's not a new reality. It's not a new life. Look, when you die, right, this process here, this geometry here, this is still unfolding. It's just at a different polarity. This will still reach a new stage of positive polarity, and it will play out as a new life. So whatever you were assuming, whatever your base level is here, your contextual sense, however you saw yourself in the previous iteration, I'm not going to say life, I'm going to call it an iteration. However you saw yourself in a previous iteration will play out again. Because that's what determines your birth conditions. It's not about contracts with soul being. Like we do not need to bring in cosmology. We do not need to draw from theosophy, which is what most of this manifesting stuff is based on, which is based on the writings of Helena Blavatsky, which is mostly nonsense, of course. Just like most of these postmodern spiritual writings are. They don't get the mechanics because they don't spend years studying metaphysics and alchemy and whatnot like I did. So we have these processes outlined here. If you understand what I just said now, you understand even more. I really don't know how much deeper I should go into this right now, but that's really the basis of how things work. Yeah, that's really all there is to this. I highly recommend you guys to share it, to get it out there, to get people understanding these concepts, to talk about them, to even question them, right? Question this stuff, go deeper into it, criticize it, try and tear it apart and try and dismiss it if you can. And tell me what you think, because I want to know. I've been holding on to this information for a very, 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 very long time, many years. And only just recently have I had the impulse, the intuitive impulse, by shifting my state, fundamentally, my conceptual sense. This is why I was able to actually manifest what I'm doing now. It's because I changed the way that I see myself and the way the world sees me, and here we are. And here we are today. I'm putting out reality synthesis, and that's how it works. That's how change is made. I didn't have to try, it just happened. So that's really the basis of how this stuff works. Like, share, and very much subscribe, because we're going to be talking about this much more in the future. I look forward to seeing you again. My name's DJ, and I'll see you next time.